guys hear me? Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight, my lovely panelists and the audience, moderator, executive director. My name is Alex Anthus, and I am the education manager here at the Erie Art Museum. It is an honor to welcome you all to tonight's panel discussion, Art and Influence, the Power of Mentorship in Rust Belt Cities. This panel is inspired by the museum's current exhibition in our Nicholas Gallery, which is upstairs, Andrade Garber Spite in Conversation. This panel is part of a larger effort to celebrate and examine the growing network of individuals and organizations who are uplifting Erie's creative communities through the modalities of mentorship. It is important to acknowledge that the work of fostering mentorship, collaboration, and transparency is ongoing. And these individuals are just some of the many folks I know in places like Erie doing the boots to the ground work that is so very impactful and important. As someone relatively new to the position, I'm continually inspired by the dedication, talent, and tenacity in this city. And I remain committed to learning and growing from you and alongside of you. On behalf of the museum, thank you for being here and contributing to this invaluable ongoing dialogue. But before I hand things over to Laura, I'd like to quickly share a parable that I recently came across and I feel is kind of relevant to tonight's discussion. The parable goes that a grandparent speaks to their grandchild and says, "Did you know that there are two wolves living inside of each of us? One wolf is good, embodying love, kindness, and acceptance, and the other is bad, representing hate, anger, and selfishness." Upon learning this, the grandchild asks, "Which wolf wins?" To which the grandparent replies, "The one you feed." I believe we can all attest to the power of support and recognize that each of us has arrived here today because someone at some point chose to nurture the good wolf within us, even if that someone was ourselves. And with that said, to start us off, I will hand it over to the museum's executive director, Laura Demenzik, who will introduce this evening's esteemed moderator who brings a wealth of experience and insight to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. As an artist, educator, and administrator myself, I've found mentors are essential to create community. I wanted to thank our Bridges cohort program for funding this panel discussion and the In Conversation exhibition upstairs. The work in that exhibition by Edna Andrade, Daniel Garber, and Francis Spate are on loan from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and they provide insight into the role of mentorship in the Joseph Plavkin exhibition, which also shares that space. Garber and Spite taught Andrade and Plavkin, who both studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So please be sure to go up there tonight. We will have some time after the discussion to take a look at the work because the exhibition does close on Sunday. I also want to make sure that I invite you to the next evolution of that exhibition featuring some Plavkin students, which will be opening on Gallery Night on February 28th, along with another Associated Artists of Pittsburgh exhibition as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Paula Burley. Dr. Paula Burley is an accomplished art historian, curator, and educator. She serves as an assistant professor of art history at Allegheny College, where she co-directs the Public Humanities program and is affiliated with the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. Dr. Burley's research delves into post-war and contemporary art, with a particular focus on feminist speculative fiction in visual art. Her work has been featured in prestigious publications such as Art Forum and the Brooklyn Rail. We are thrilled to have her guide tonight's conversation. Paula?
Yeah, so Al.
But first, we're going to introduce you to these lovely folks right here. First up is Antonio Howard. He is a self-taught artist, author, and advocate whose story is one of resilience and transformation. After spending 26 and a half years in prison, Antonio emerged as a powerful voice in the Erie community. using his art to spark dialogue on social justice and criminal justice reform, a 2019 Emerging Artist Fellow and a 2021 Teaching Artist. Antonio's work has been featured in galleries and public spaces. He is also the author of 3 self-published books and a frequent guest speaker on equity and reform. If you'd like him to speak, you can go to his website and a lot of these other folks. Antonio's journey embodies the healing and transformative power of art, and we are honored to have him here. If we want to just wait for applause to kind of get through everybody, that would be great. Our next panelist is Dr. Tyler Titus. They are a social worker, activist, and the founding chair of Compton's Table, a nonprofit that provides safe spaces and resources for the LGBTQ+ community in Northwestern Pennsylvania. With over 16 years of advocacy experience, Dr. Titus has served as Erie City School Board President and Erie City Councilor, making history in 2017 as Pennsylvania's first openly transgender elected official. Currently, they run a private therapy practice while continuing to champion queer rights and social justice. Their work exemplifies how mentorship and advocacy can create safe spaces and meaningful change. Our next panelist is Kyra Taylor. Taylor is the co-founder and executive director of Erie's Black Wall Street, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering Erie's Black community through education, social networks, and the promotion of Black entrepreneurship. A passionate advocate, Taylor has spearheaded initiatives addressing inequities, including clothing drives and youth symposiums. Additionally, she has a BA from Edinburgh University and holds an advanced graduate certificate from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. Holistically, she blends her roles as a behavior counselor, life coach, and community leader to inspire transformative change and foster a continued culture of Black excellence. Our next panelist is Benton Bainbridge. Bainbridge is a video artist, educator, and the founder and director of Feed Media Art Center in Erie. His career has taken him around the globe, creating immersive installations and performances showcased in venues like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Benton's return to Erie has brought new opportunities for collaboration and innovation, as Feed provides a space for artists to explore creativity using both vintage and cutting-edge technology. His passion for fostering artistic dialogue is shaping Erie's art landscape in remarkable ways. Our next panelist is Lourdes Hasso. Hasso is an artist, educator, and advocate who serves as the program director at the Inner City Neighborhood Art House, a ministry of the Benedictine Sisters of Erie. Born in Acambaro, Guanajuato, Mexico, and raised in Chicago, Hasso draws from her own lived experience to use art as a powerful tool for empowerment and transformation. With a Bachelor of Arts in Photography from Columbia College Chicago, she has dedicated her career to fostering creativity, cultural identity, and social justice. Hasso is recognized for her impactful work, including being named Erie Arts and Culture's Carla Hughes Art Educator of the Year. Through her teaching, artistic practice, and advocacy, she continues to inspire and uplift, helping individuals discover their voices and envision brighter futures. And last but certainly not least is Jude Shingle. Shingle is the Deputy Director of the Erie Center for Arts and Technology, ECAT, where he leads the art department in providing free arts programs for teens across Erie County. Shingle's work fosters creativity and collaboration through initiatives like the Teen Arts Career Program and Big Art Day, a large-scale and collaborative art-making and print event held annually. Previously founded the Idea Lab at the Erie Public Library, a makerspace that empowered hundreds of community members with access to advanced technologies. Jude's commitment to integrating the arts into education and the community is both innovative and impactful. And with that, please join me in giving a warm round of applause to this evening's panelists and our moderator. Thank you all for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Dr. Burley.
So thanks so much, Alex and Laura, for organizing this fun panel. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to the panelists. I'm excited to chat with you. So my role as moderator is pretty easy. I get to just defer to others. But briefly to start us off, I will just try to provide a little bit of context regarding this really interesting topic. So I wanted to start by just foregrounding a couple of images from the exhibition upstairs, which hopefully you've all had a chance to see, but if you haven't, we'll have time afterwards. So I hope you'll all go up there. I love the structure of the shows upstairs. I have these two exhibitions that are sharing space And the reason why I love it is because with the Joseph Plavkin show, it's part 2 of a 3-part retrospective that's exploring sort of the trajectory of this really eminent artist's career. But then we have this adjacent and related exhibition that explores the relationships that sort of influenced, nourished, supported that career, as well as other careers and these interchanges. And the reason why I like this so much is because I think I'm an art historian, and so when we look at histories of art, we're often looking at histories of objects, and we focus exclusively on the objects, and we don't talk about the relationships that make them possible and support them. We also tend to kind of mythologize lone genius creators, right? In their studio, locked away, Pablo Picasso and, those kinds of, usually, right? And they're locked away and they're making works by themselves, which is, of course, the reality. Everyone is embedded in these really, necessary, challenging, again, nourishing conversations. I think mentorship, teaching, collaboration, all of these things are incredibly important, but historically we haven't really privileged them in our own conversations about the work. So I really appreciate what's happening upstairs, and I think that's what kind of gave rise or was the impetus for this panel tonight. So you have works by Joseph Plavkin in the exhibition upstairs. And these works by Plavkin fascinated me. I wasn't super familiar with Plavkin before I came to the area, but I thought of his work as being kind of, observations from life, influenced by Impressionism. Certainly one of his teachers were. But then when I saw these kind of hallucinatory, hard edge, almost abstractions, I was really kind of shocked in a good way. So these works are from the 1960s, where he's, I think, deeply influenced by some of his own students, actually, to kind of get really experimental with color, to start departing from color as descriptive. He's also using acrylics, which were newly available on the market. So he's using these kind of high key colors and these super bold lines to do something where, although he'll never abandon his commitment to representation and the scene and the recognizable connection to the world, he's starting to gesture towards a lot of these conversations that are happening in the art world around abstraction. And then in the exhibition, we see all of these other kind of interlocutors with whom he's having conversations, either mentors or mentees. And Laura already alluded to some of this, but you have Daniel Garber and Francis Spite, and both of them were instructors at the Pennsylvania Academy for Fine Arts, where Joseph Plavkin studied in the late 1920s, 1927 to 1930. And in fact, Spite was at one point Daniel Garber's assistant and his student, and then he becomes an instructor there. And so Plavkin works with them, and then about a decade later, we have Edna Andrade, who then also works with them. And then we have works by Richard Aniszkiewicz, and Aniszkiewicz is going to study with Joseph Plavkin at Erie Technical High School, where Plavkin would teach after he returned from PAFA to Erie for 30 years. And Aniszkiewicz, much like Edna Andrade, are working in, again, those really high-key colors, but they are abandoning their commitment to representation and instead exploring geometric forms, and they're associated with a movement known as op art. So the art upstairs looks kind of wildly different, but you can find these interesting through lines when I think you look at the geometries and the palette. So here's just a couple of images from the show. There's Francis Spate's work, or Spite, excuse me, I always mispronounce that. And I think despite the fact that Edna Andrade's work looks so abstract, whereas again, you have this kind of fidelity to life in the work of Joseph Plavkin, Andrade was really fascinated with nature, and so the painting that you see in the middle, she was actually thinking about the underlying structure of waves in the ocean and the phosphorescence of the sea. And she thought about the underlying geometries that kind of structure, the world around us. She thought about the rigid rectilinearity of the architecture that she encountered when she moved to Philadelphia and studied at PAFA. And so it's almost like she's giving us a blueprint of the world, whereas Plavkin is kind of doing something a little bit more imitative of the things that we can see. Oh, and I do have a little detail there. I forgot about that. All right. So what I wanted to do very briefly, I promise in less than 10 minutes, is just highlight a couple of art historical examples of really significant educational systems, schools, structures of mentorships, sometimes artist-made systems to kind of subvert the existing dominant system to do something new. So thinking about the ways in which mentorship has impacted the course of art history. And so when thinking about how to approach this, I thought about Edna Andrade, whose work we just saw, and both Andrade and Plavkin were fortunate to be awarded travel scholarships when they went to PAFA. So they were given these travel scholarships that allowed them to travel to Europe, which was incredibly pivotal for both of them in terms of their arts education. And when Andrade went to Europe, she was really taken with a lot of German art historical precedents, and specifically the German Bauhaus. And the German Bauhaus was a very brief, short-lived experiment, but a deeply influential one. It existed from 1919 to 1933. So it was founded after the conclusion of World War I by someone named Walter Gropius. You're seeing it existed in 3 different places. You're seeing the most kind of famous building in Dessau in Germany associated with the school. And on the right, you have the cover of the original Bauhaus kind of manifesto or program. I put this up there, and I know it's kind of hard to see. It's quite abstracted by Lionel Feiniger, but it's a woodcut of a medieval cathedral because the Bauhaus artists were interested in kind of resurrecting a model for art making from the Middle Ages. And the reason they wanted to go back to the Middle Ages is because they wanted to eradicate the kind of hierarchies between the media. So they were tired of thinking about art with a capital A as being defined exclusively by painting and sculpture. And they thought about how when you go into a cathedral, you see paintings and you see stained glass and you see statuary and you see really beautiful, stunning architecture. And sometimes there's sound involved because people are singing. It's a total work of art. It's immersive. And they wanted to, much like the medieval craftsmen who participated in the making of that, in a collective endeavor where one artist was not more important than the other, regardless of what media they were working in, they wanted to resurrect that model, right, of all of the arts and crafts working together without the hierarchical divisions between design and architecture and painting, et cetera, et cetera. They also, in theory, and this is very important, wanted to eradicate the hierarchies between gender. And so in theory, the Bauhaus was to sort of uphold equality for men and women. Women didn't often have access to art school at this time, so that was really radical. It didn't work out. It didn't pan out as perhaps planned or promised. Walter Gropius said, yes, we will, admit all of the women who apply, but then a lot more women applied than he expected. So he capped the admission for women at 1/3 of the population. He also insisted that women who enrolled in the Bauhaus enroll in the weaving workshop because they were more fit for working with fibers and textiles than they were for the difficult, physical, arduous work of making a painting. Nonetheless, the women came, and I don't pretend to know Edna Andrade's, mindset, but I can only imagine that she may have been struck by the ways in which so many prominent women working in the Bauhaus really innovated within the structures that they could, and that was within the weaving workshop, which became the most financially successful workshop in the history of the Bauhaus. And so many interesting artists came out of this. This is a portrait of many of them on the stairs, and probably the most well-known art historically is Annie Albers, who would later go on to teach at Yale and in fact teach Richard Aniszkiewicz, so lots of connections here. But these were artists who were kind of reinventing weaving. They said, all right, you're not going to let us make paintings? Fine, we're going to make paintings in weaving, and we're going to think about how to, this is not your grandmother's weaving, was kind of the vibe, right? And this is Annie Albers actually at her studio at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. She had to leave Germany, as many did in 1933, when the Nazis the rise of Nazism and National Socialism effectively shut down the Bauhaus. And then she came to another really vibrant arts community, which was a short-lived but deeply influential school in Black Mountain College. All right. And so what I'm kind of starting to get to with this is the way in which mentorship can be an especially strong support network for historically minoritized groups who have perhaps not had access and privilege in terms of arts education and opportunities. So the women at the Bauhaus mentored each other within a school that still oppressed them, frankly, and subverted their needs, but allowed some of them to be there. How generous. But then later on, when you get into, the feminist movement proper, you have mentorship structures cropping up that are exclusively for women. And this is one case, the AIR Gallery, which was founded in 1972 and still exists in Brooklyn, New York. AIR was founded, they were tossing around the idea of calling it the Jane Eyre Gallery. And so then they eventually went with AIR because it, of course, reads Eyre, a homonym for Jane Eyre. But it stands for Artists in Residence Incorporated being at the end. And this is just a group portrait of all the women involved. And it was a not-for-profit artist space that was devoted to providing a platform exhibiting the work of women artists and providing them with solo shows, which was an opportunity that they were often rarely afforded. It was an American institution in New York, but they were really kind of strategic also about bringing in women from other countries, other regions, to kind of spark these global dialogues at the time, which was really exciting. And then, to continue thinking about the ways in which mentorship can provide opportunities where none previously existed or were limited for artists from minoritized group, I wanted to bring up the artist Charles White, who, and this is him at the Otis Studio. He taught for a number of years at Otis College of Art and Design, which is a really well-known art school in Los Angeles. And Charles White was an absolutely prolific and fantastic artist, but historically kind of underappreciated and underexhibited. And recently, and he died somewhat young in 1979, and in ensuing decades, it was his students who really held him up as this incredibly influential and powerful metaphor. And he ended up mentoring some of the most well-known artists, and specifically artists of color who are working today, such as Kerry James Marshall and David Hammonds. I mean, these are world famous household names, and they say, we really owe what we became to the encouragement and the constant kind of support and the conversations with Charles White at Otis College. And recently, starting in 2019, there have been some key exhibitions, one of which was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, highlighting the work of Charles White, and specifically, though, his sort of position as a teacher and a mentor. And I thought a lot about that when I was looking at the exhibitions upstairs, because Joseph Plowkin is an amazing artist, but he also taught in Erie for 30 years and left behind this incredible legacy, this rich legacy of kind of, holding people up and introducing them to the kind of, the ins and out of being a professional artist, which is not a self-evident or straightforward path, and I think in the arts that for that reason, mentorship is especially important. This is a work by Charles White on the left and then a work by Kerry James Marshall on the right. And I was looking at the exhibition catalog from the show from MoMA, and I was reminded that if you read or if you listened to the audio guide, you could hear audio excerpts from interviews with his students talking about the enormous impact of his tutelage. And this is Kerry James Marshall on his teacher, Charles White. And he says, he was more influential as an inspiration for trying to make work about subjects that mattered to you. That's what most people would say. That was what the impact Charles White had on you. You should always be engaged with history. You should always be engaged with the politics of your time. And if you're not doing it directly, certainly to always make sure that was present in people's consciousness, that they understood something about history, and that your work should be in the service of helping to dignify people, which I think is a really beautiful way of thinking about what art can do. And indeed, if you look at the pupils of Charles White, their styles vary enormously, but there is this kind of core ethos around sort of celebrating often the Black experience, dignifying folks, right, and showing the incredible diversity of people's lived experiences. And then another artist, so now we're kind of getting into the contemporary period, and I think the needle is moving, albeit slowly, towards a place where the art world is starting to recognize, support, and kind of privilege mentorship as an actual part of an artist's practice, not something that is auxiliary and separate. And I think that that's really evident in the work of Mark Bradford, who is a Los Angeles-based artist and someone who I think has done really incredible things in terms of mentorship. So he has a well-known and highly successful painting practice. He has represented the United States at the Venice Biennale, for example, extremely successful artist. And he has used sales from his paintings to fund an institution that he founded in 2014 called Art and Practice. And this institution exists in the neighborhood in Los Angeles where he grew up in Leimert Park, a historically underserved, kind of disenfranchised neighborhood with a low median income, a place where he worked at his mom's hair salon growing up. And he really saw a need for more kind of social support systems. And so if you go to Art and Practice, you can take free art classes. But he also has programs specifically for kids who are in foster care, for instance, to do skill building, to kind of learn the professional, social, personal skills they need to succeed as independent adults in the world. And so there's a lot of different facets of this. He doesn't rely on grant funding because he wants the organization to be nimble and flexible and not be kind of beholden to any other organization. Hence, he funds it with the sales from his own artworks. And in doing so, he really thinks of it as what he calls a social practice. So it's not paintings over here, organization over here. It's paintings and social practice are nodes on this larger kind of dispersed network of practice. And the paintings are not more important than the social practice. And I think it's a really fascinating model for approaching art making in the 21st century. And finally, the last artist I want to just briefly allude to think about different models for this happening is Elisa Niesenbaum, another New York-based artist. And so Niesenbaum has a hybrid Mexican and German heritage, and so she's multilingual. And she works with an artist-founded organization called Immigrant Movement International, which is actually founded by another artist activist, Tanya Bruguera. And so Niesenbaum offers art history classes in English to new immigrants to the United States, and without regard for documentation status. In fact, mostly works with undocumented immigrants. And so she offers these classes in English to help them get up to speed and to be able to kind of, function with day-to-day English. But through specifically the kind of the visual language and the topic of art history, she develops really deep and sustained relationships with the folks in her classes. And then she has a portrait practice, and you're seeing an example of that here, that comes out of those collaborations. And so she'll have her students and they work together, they get to know each other, they're having meals together, and then she'll ask them, how would you like to be represented in a portrait? And they talk about maybe things that are important to them. She spends a lot of time with them, and she ends up making a portrait that kind of comes out and documents the relationship, but it very much subverts the traditional power dynamic that you have between an artist, who is the kind of creative subject, and then the sitter, the person being painted, where there's often this kind of passive static relation, but this is a much more kind of dynamic dialogue that's coming out of, again, this larger social practice where the painting is part of it, but again, a node on a kind of larger network of exchange. So these are just, and now we're on to Antonio's work. We put all of our images together. So these are just a few examples of kind of what this looks like, maybe historically and now in contemporary art. We're really fortunate, though, to have a widely interdisciplinary panel. So we have some folks who are working in the visual arts, but others who are working in other creative practices. So I'm really excited to hear from them just about what mentorship looks like. What does it look like in our region? What are some of the challenges with mentorship opportunities? So I am now going to ask you all some questions. So I'm just going to throw out a question, which is kind of long, but you did have a chance to read it before, so hopefully it's not too out of the blue. And, we can kind of go down the line, but I hope you'll feel free to sort of, interrupt each other, jump in, elaborate, and we can kind of take it in whatever direction we want. And Alex and I have the images you sent us, so we can pull up anything that is relevant. But to start things off, historically, mentorship has played a crucial role in the art world in terms of the transmission of artistic styles and ideas and related to professional development. The personal relationship between mentor and mentee feels especially important in a field where the path to become a working artist is rarely straightforward. Mentorship can occur within the traditional framework of an art school or more informally outside of institutions. Can you all talk about a mentoring relationship that has been impactful to you, whether you were the mentor or the mentee? And I realize that little preamble about art may not apply to everyone. So just impactful relationships of mentorship, mentee or mentor.
Yeah, so I think they said all the time.
Yep. Okay. Well,
So one of the most, so first and foremost, a lot of my mentor-mentee relationships are unofficial, right? Where the mentor doesn't actually know that they're mentor, or if I'm mentoring somebody, I don't necessarily acknowledge myself as a mentor. But one of the most impactful relationships that I've had, the person I attribute to my artistic trajectory since I've been released from prison, was Patrick Fisher. Patrick Fisher was the former director of Erie Arts and Culture and a phenomenal human being, a man who put his body where his beliefs are. And if you're a person who just wants to complain about what's going on in this world, he's the worst friend to have, because he will create the solutions and call you on your bullshit. And he did that for me. I came out of prison seeking to separate myself from art because I had some bad experiences. And for all intents and purposes, I was nothing more than a prison artist, right? And prison artist is just that genre of prison art that people refer to as not really being art. I painted for personal reasons, growth and development, to maintain my sanity. And Patrick had the audacity to make that process public by inviting me to paint murals in the city of Erie. And because I trusted him, I took that opportunity seriously. And what I learned from it required me to redefine myself as not just an artist, but a community muralist that involves the community. And Patrick, along the way, taught me many things, including, but not limited to, respecting the art of other people, not undercutting people. Seeing art as a community activity instead of just a personal one, right? And even in my personal paintings, trying to find a voice that gives other people opportunities and creates space for them. Patrick also taught me one of the most difficult parts of art, and that is the business of art, right? Writing, saying no to some things, requiring that people pay me, and not just working for free with hopes that someday someone will decide that my value requires them to pay me, right? But more importantly, he taught me how to have those conversations. And I'm a firm believer that your best friends are the people who always give you a third option. And when I always saw things in black and white, Patrick was always willing to give me the third option. So he was a mentor. One of my best friends, still is to this day. But like I said, there's been other mentors that are like fly by night, passing opportunities. Stephen Trahosky was another one, right? I'm a person who comes from a violent background, served 26 and a half years in prison. And if you know Stephen's story, if you know his story, and kind of violence his family was subjected to, Stephen opened his doors for me, told me I could show my art in his gallery, bought one of my paintings, showed me how to hang a painting, right? Don't know me from dirt, but, and he might not see himself as a mentor, right? But that kind of demonstration and activity has carried through to my involvement with other people and my willingness to open doors for them. So you can be a mentor to people who don't know it, and people can be a mentor to you without you even acknowledge it. So those are just two.
I think I'm gonna have a hard time sitting between the two of them. I can already see. So I guess for me, one of the things I'll take it in a little bit of different direction as well. Some of my biggest mentors, and this isn't me just sitting up here trying to get kudos about, the parenthood, but are definitely my two children. As somebody who grew up as queer, but not having the words to tell anybody what was happening, and hiding and masking most of my life in a really rural conservative area, and growing up and trying to find somebody who looked like what I was feeling like on the inside. I've watched my two children unapologetically be themselves, and it was when they found their words that I was able to find the words to share who I was, and that has been true throughout really just how I've navigated my career. I started out as a case aide in Venango County, and watching those youth come up through, and just really the resilience and the brilliance that we have forced on them as a society that they should not have had to have, but that they did and they carried, allowed me to step more into my authentic self. And quite frankly, whenever I get stuck, I look to see where the Black women are, and those have been so many of my mentors. I look to see what they're doing. I look to see how they're moving, especially Black trans women. And I've not met many of the people, but they have shaped who I am, like Laverne Cox, and some of these other phenomenal people. William Dorsey Swan, who was a drag queen, the beginning of drag queen in the 1800s, who was a formerly enslaved person. Like just watching the way that other oppressed people have moved gives me not just permission, but an obligation to move in ways too. So that's kind of where a lot of my mentorship has happened. It's through the youth, but those who paved the way for me to even exist.
For me, it was, I went to school at Edinburgh, and I went to school for art. I actually did art for 4 years there, and I had a very negative experience with one of my professors. But in my second semester as a freshman, I met a professor there who was unapologetically herself. She was a Black woman with very short, shaved head, and she walked in the room and just demanded confidence and attention, and was the most eloquent person woman that I've ever met, that was just so bold. This is Dr. Rhonda Matthews. And throughout my years at Edinburgh, I took more classes with her that I didn't even need to take because I was an art major. I didn't need to take sociology classes. And when it was time for me to switch majors, which I did in my 4th year, which my parents are probably not too happy about, it was a no-brainer. I went to her and just to ask for her guidance on that. And she's like, oh yeah, you can do X, Y, and Z. And it was just so nonchalant that she really made me feel like I could be unapologetically myself, and that I belong in spaces that weren't necessarily created or designed for someone that looked like me. But then to now have the impact of that, of my 5-year-old, who is the most confident, the most self-sufficient, eloquent, knows what she wants, knows what she does not want, very stylish dresser, and has a PhD in sarcasm. And just to see how what used to be something in me that was very timid, I have a social anxiety still that I deal with, but to see something in me that was so timid, to now see it realized in my daughter that is so bold and so confident, and I do my check-ins with her, and I ask her, how is mommy's report card? And she will let me know, you're doing this right. This is how you could be better. I just took her to a presentation with me, or a talk I gave to some kids at Lincoln School. And she was like, Mom, you did a good job in there. I'm very proud of you. I'm like, oh, thank you. However, you forgot to tell the kids to be mindful. You forgot to tell them to be respectful of others. You forgot to tell them more of your own superpowers. And so for me to see that now in my daughter, it's truly an amazing thing.
To Antonio's point, I think oftentimes mentorships exist outside of institutional frameworks, and I'd like to talk about first my mentor, Bill Etra. Bill Etra was an early visionary of media art, and so from a time when you actually had to make the tools, to even make the art. And so I'd say about Bill, I say often that Erie was a really great place to grow up, to be an aspiring artist, because it's such a rich environment, including art that I was exposed to here at Erie Art Museum, and, really visionary, bold art like kinetic art from John Vahanian and Dave Seitzinger, and seeing performance art at Clay Space, etc. but media art not so much. So I went to New York City to learn art, and went to a university there to learn film and TV, so I could have a career, as well as to try to pursue this idea of art made in this medium. But unfortunately, video art, as I imagined it, was totally out of fashion when I got to New York. And the people, eventually I was lucky enough to meet some of the people who actually created this idea of a video being a performable medium. And so Bill Etra, when I first met him, within an hour, he was utterly changing my life. And the first thing he said to me that will stay with me forever is, he said at this time when video was still even, very unpopular and relatively uncommon, he said, "Benton, video will become a mainstream art form as soon as the tools are as common as pencil and paper." And so now we live in a time where, if I ask someone, thankfully thank you for the pencil and pen and paper. We've been provided them up here, but it's unlikely someone might even have a pencil in their pocket, but they definitely have a media art device, a video art device for creating and sharing art. So he gave me many important lessons, not just art lessons, but I think mentors often become, give you life lessons. So, my gosh, it's impossible to encapsulate Bill really in just a, short bio, but I will say that Bill's personal life was profoundly influenced me, because he's someone who came from a prominent family in New York City. His family has their names on hospitals and stuff like that. But by the time I met him, he had debilitating medical problems, and between the health system in Canada, where he first was seriously injured and ultimately had to have his leg amputated because of that, and then the health system in the United States of America, where the stenosis of his vertebrae meant that as I, spent years with him, eventually he was completely paralyzed to the point where he could only move one hand, and he just kept on making art with a tablet, So that was unfortunately Bill is gone now, but he remains a tremendous inspiration to me. I guess the last lesson is really that he said, he was in such extreme pain, but he had such a drive to live, because he just wanted to keep on creating, right? And so that to me is probably the ultimate inspiration. And then I also, actually, can we just play this video of Bill? After a word from our sponsor.
Introducing Next Generation Baton. Hi, I'm Bill Etra. This is the Red Etra video synthesizer. The synthesizer controls the height of an image through 0. The width of an image.
Bill is the co-inventor of this visual tool, this video instrument essentially for painting video. And so this device is called the Red Etra video synthesizer. Bill said, hey, it's really smart to put your name in your invention so people remember you. That was yet another lesson. But yeah, basically this device, essentially it's like a TV that instead of just drawing the picture like a conventional grid, you could also change the grid itself. That's an easy way to explain it. So,
invoke direct.
Yeah, so this is a demonstration. It's really funny and fun. So check it out, and check out Bill's work. He was always a character, and so he he's never boring. Let's put it that way. And I'd just like to speak very quickly about some artists here in town whom we've been mentoring at Feed. Actually, I see Liz Slagus in the audience who's working with me at Feed, and we have been trying to create a place so artists who are interested in video art don't have to leave town to learn the medium. And there's a trio of local artists who go by STEM City Collective. And so STEM City, we just confirmed, I knew it was a long time, but they have done a weekly art rave every week without missing a week since April 12th of 2024. And these are 3 local artists. Aaron Hermersky does these animations. Aaron goes by Moon Eyes. We met Aaron as a crochet artist. So Aaron didn't call himself a media artist. And that was a shot of Savannah Wilson, who goes by Kelly Kills. Vanna's work, she has so much, but she didn't know what VJing was before she came to Feed, and she's an avid VJ. And then finally, Lone Sav, who is, this flashes by very quickly. In any case, Lone Sav was the first artist who came to Feed through Patrick Fisher, who's such a mentor and influence in our scene here, even now that we lost him to Pittsburgh. But yeah, so Patrick introduced Alex Daly, Lone Sav, and so Lone Sav has made many exhibitions, including a solo, well, actually a 2-person show that Liz Slagus curated called Eclipsing Stars that we did with Erie Arts and Culture. And so they're all between 22 and 25, and so doing amazing things that are continually blowing my mind.
I can agree with everybody up here, just as Antonio was saying and Benton about Patrick Fisher. He was one of the greatest influences for me here in Erie, just as Leslie Sotomayor, who went back to Texas and then it's now back in another place in PA. They had a great influence, but I cannot go further without saying the influence that I had in the relationships that I now know as an adult that I had with my teachers. My teachers from grammar school, I'm from Chicago. I'm very lucky. I was very lucky enough that all of my instructors from kindergarten to 8th grade were all Latino. They were either Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Chilean, Venezuelan, Panama, Peru. I mean, you can name it. They were all there. They were my teachers. When I started to lose that influence, and I thought this was normal. I thought everybody had a Latino teacher in their school. But once I got to high school, it just changed dramatically. And I had no Latino influence, nobody to look up to. And I started to realize this is not a normal thing, right? I went to high school to do photography. That was my major in high school because my cousin had a camera and I had no idea what to do with my life. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I'll try it. I went into that. And in high school, I was lucky enough that I met this woman named Corinne Rose. She's now part of the education department for the MOCP and is now working at the Art Institute. She's there, part of their education department. And she had the biggest influence. And I'm very grateful for what she did because I would just photograph, right? We would have all these assignments and she would come in to kind of tell us what's out there for photography. And I showed her one of my pictures of a street vendor, selling street corn. And she's like, you need to show this. Like, this is very important. I'm like, this is my normal. This is what we usually, walk down the street and this is what we know, la señora Marta who sells corn. And she's like, you need to put it in, there's this contest available. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, if you're Latino, art is not necessarily a lifestyle. You cannot make money. Therefore, that's not something you should do. So she pushed me into putting my stuff always into contests. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And, I ended up making money, and I ended up actually getting scholarships to go to college out of all things. I told my parents I'm going to school for art. They're like, okay, whatever. Right. But they would always say like, yeah, you'll change your mind. Right. And I never did. Going into college, she was still there with me all the time. She would, she helped me with my college application, with the essays. Even when I was, my freshman year or my first year of college, it sucked. I had the worst professors who looked at me and they're like, you're never going to be an artist. And I was like, okay, fine. So I had to kind of change my mind into maybe I don't want to be an artist, but art saved my life and it got me to college. So then it's like, okay, what can I do? I love photography. Once you go into that dark room and you see something come alive, it just traps a memory in there. And I loved it so much. Then I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to teach photography. I want students to look at me and be like, I want to do that. And just help them tell their stories. Their stories are so important. Just like everybody here has a story. It's so important for them to just show it and demonstrate it. But, with Corinne, she would always push me and she's like, don't give up. It's okay. When you have a professor that puts you down and you're like, okay, whatever. I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and do this. But even in college, you would always look for that one person of color that you can kind of relate, because you would be there and you'd be like, oh yeah, we have this assignment, and it's like, go out into the world. It's like, I live on my own. I'm paying for college on my own. I can't afford the paper. What can I do? Like, I was working 4 jobs to get myself through art school, right? And then even then is just trying to find the place just to make sure that you had that mentor. And Corinne did so much, with that she would, Lourdes, I came across paper, right, to make your photographs for your assignment. Just little things that one person, I kind of saw the light in. She also then was like, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? And I was like, no, I was, I think, a junior in college teaching. I wasn't sure. And she's like, yeah, I have this opportunity for you to come and just teach a class with another teaching artist that was doing poetry. And she's like, you're a photographer, you know it. I'm like, okay, fine. I did it. And I fell in love with it. Just to see the kids play around with the camera and, again, showing their stories. It's so important. I loved it. But again, it's having to have that relationship with someone that tells you it's okay, it sucks, but you'll get through it. But the understanding of her, knowing where it came from, knowing that I didn't have that support system that all of my peers had. Sorry, I get emotional all the time because it was hard. And I'm sorry, I don't think you realize, as a person of color, to make it in the art world, it's not easy. I'm not even doing my art right still to this day because I have to make ends meet. So we can sit up here and say our art is great, art is profitable. Sorry, it might be for some, but for some others it's harder, and we have to bring that to light. But, sorry, I just get it, sorry. But it just helps us express. And with that, I'm going to shift it a little, because just like Antonio was saying, that you don't know, right, that you're a mentor, that that's necessarily what you're doing, but it's the relationships that you're creating with the students or with someone. For me, with the art house, I have a wonderful story, and I have many to share. But we had a volunteer come in, and I kind of have recognized them. I've been at the art house for 17 years, and I had a student come in, or not a student, a volunteer. They had an aide. They needed an aide. And I looked at the aide, and we kind of looked at each other like, I think I know you, I'm not sure. And this aide goes to me, hey, you're Miss Hassel, right? I'm like, yeah, who are you? He's like, well, you might have known me as Ernesto, but I'm Leilani now. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was like, I remember you. You were my first photo student. You were one of my first photo students at the art house. And he's like, I loved it. I loved coming here. He's like, I miss it. I wish I could keep doing it. Or, he was so happy. And it just brought tears to my eyes because sometimes when you're at the artwork and then when you're part of the admin part in, in a nonprofit, it gets overwhelming and you get stressed out about things. Then it makes it worth it when you have a story come in out of the blue and just tells you they loved it. They want to come back. But with that shift, I actually had kept like a little Polaroid because I always took Polaroids of our first class or one of my classes. And we had it and I'm like, hey, look, I still have the Polaroid. He couldn't believe it. 5 minutes later, he comes and knocks on my office and he goes, hey, Miss Hasso, look. He brings out his phone and he's like, I told my mom that you were still here and she still has the pictures of his photographs and his awards. And that made me so happy because then you don't realize that you're a mentor, but then you're realizing that for that second, for that moment, you had brought happiness to them and that they're still so proud of their artwork. And that's why we continue to do what we do with people that works with youth. We just continue to give them that little bit of light that they need. So, yeah, like.
Sorry if I'm initial listeners right.
Talking about. Okay. So, I don't know why I'm on this panel. First, thank you. I thought the qualifying thing would be beard length, but clearly Benton has that. So, I run an after-school program. When we started 3 years ago, this is a photo of the program. We did traditional classes. We had 12 classes. Kids could sign up. It was capped at 10. Halfway through the semester, maybe 6 were still there. We were trying to figure out why. I think there's a lot of reasons why. But then I was reminded of a story by Michael Mead, who is he's kind of like a mythic mentor, which reminded me Alex's story, the parable. Anyway, tells the story of he's working with incarcerated youth who are coming out, and they're in a library, and the idea is to partner them with a mentor. And so they're kind of going through and they're telling their stories, and they get to a gentleman who's about 6'4", 250 pounds, black man, and they're all assuming he's going to get partnered with this mentor who is, basically a football coach. And he goes, no, I want this woman right there. And it was a 65-year-old retired librarian. And afterwards, everyone's like, why did he pick that person? He wanted to learn how to read. And she's a retired librarian and thought, this is the person who could teach me how to read. And the takeaway was just, you, as mentors, you don't get to pick who your mentee is. Mentees are going to pick you. And it's an old idea, right? That when you're ready for a teacher, they're going to show up. And so we totally changed our model. And I'm kind of realizing that my career is a lot of like trying to like kind of learning the science of like, how do you create environments where mentorship can happen? So we started an open studio model where all the studios are open. All the instructors are there. The students can pick what they want to work on. They can pick when they work on it, who they work on it, what medium they want to do. And then what ends up happening is they start visiting the people that they need in that moment. And it's not just the instructors, it's also the support staff, the front desk person, the people who are teaching other classes, other adults who are just passing in. And so there's this magic alchemy there that kind of happens. I know that for me, that's kind of how mentors show up. And just to share, I'd be remiss because we are in the Erie Art Museum, but Kelly Armour was a huge mentor of mine and probably the first person who taught me that education could be something. And this is not to disparage school teachers, but she totally just broke my mind in what education can be. And that was just a huge influence. So again, it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel and to hear everybody's stories. And it's really great.
We can now sit over there. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for those incredible responses. It was so fascinating to hear about the just wide range of what mentorship can and has looked like for all of you. And I think you talked about official structures, unofficial structures. I hadn't thought as much about intergenerational mentorship with children. So that was really great to hear about, especially when it's working in that direction that you maybe don't expect. We think of parents mentoring their children, but you all talked about, your kids mentoring you, and that was really lovely. Even trans historical dialogues happening with those who are maybe no longer living, but finding these kind of interlocutors in history to learn from. So I really enjoyed hearing all of that. I'm going to ask just one more question because there's a lot of us to respond, and because then I want to turn it over to the audience to ask your questions. So my only other question for you is just to kind of bring, and Jude, you did this at the end, so it's a nice segue, just to bring place and site and region into this conversation. The panel is about Rust Belt mentorship, right? So the current exhibition upstairs foregrounds meaningful relationships among a set of artists working between Erie and Philadelphia. These mentorship structures are not unique to our region, but perhaps it is all the more important to create and participate in collaborative mentor-based networks in Rust Belt cities, which have historically been situated on the margins of what many have considered the so-called art world, and we have to make our own art worlds. Taking this question broadly, can you talk about your relationship to place in your practice, however you define that? How do you think our geographic locale informs or impacts the creative networks to which you belong? So, and feel free to interpret that as broadly as you would like, whatever makes sense for you. And I'm going to bring the mic back.
So quite frankly, I don't understand the question. But the word place, when it comes to talking about art, the place that I'm always reminded of is prison. That space where art is deeply personal, certainly cathartic and therapeutic, but personal. And one of the things that I learned, I think, in painting in prison and growing as an artist is that the talent tends to stop when the money starts to come in, because the hustle dictates the growth and development after that. And it was that way in prison. It was that way when I would observe other artists in prison. They wouldn't grow beyond the hustle. And I think that is reflective in our community as well. There are a lot of us, and including myself, with the help of Patrick Fisher, I was able to kind of transcend those boundaries. But there are a lot of us who, as artists, can't grow beyond the hustle or the lack thereof, right? And so we believe that somehow not being the most popular artist and not being paid for everything impugns our credibility as an artist. And so we don't adopt that title as an artist. But it's also time that we can use to grow our craft, much needed time sometimes. And the similarities between prison and the space, the art space out here, is that it is uniquely competitive. We view each other as competitors, and there is a rigid stratification of the definitions of artists in this community. Those who believe that you can't be an artist because you don't have a degree in art, or you weren't tutored by a recognized mentor, or you can't possibly be an artist because you were once a prisoner. And I got that a lot when I got out. But one of the things that I am reminded of is that I thought I would never be free from prison, and as a prison artist, I thought I'd never be free from that stigma of being a prison artist. But I'm here. And I thought I'd never be free of the stigma of not being called an artist because I didn't go to college. But I'm on a panel of artists and mentors. So I think there's transcendence and opportunities to grow everywhere. And I'm appreciative of the spaces and places I have inhabited and those I will inhabit in the future. And thank you for recognizing me and others like me to come as an artist and allowing you to see that a lot of us who come from prison are worth more than our worst mistakes, and we do have something to contribute to society.
So when I think about and I kind of reflect on how does our location inform our work or our impact, if you think about just the queer spaces that you know right now, there's not a lot. There's not a lot that you have to kind of go through in your mind right there, but you immediately see a huge gap in representation, right? So we see a lot of, and I say this with a lot of admiration and love for a lot of the people that are doing this work. But there's this absence of a Black presence. There's absence of a disabled presence. There's absence of a trans presence. There's absence of anything that is not also binary within these spaces. And so when I ran for office in 2017 and I became the first openly elected trans person, I actually had no idea that I wasn't running because I was trans and I wanted to be. I was running because I cared about our school district I wanted to make an impact. But what I quickly learned is that now it's like Tyler the trans person, right? So that speaks to though how little of attention that so much of this is getting in our area when it's like this one voice. And I do not, and I would just like that to be very clear. I do not speak for all trans people. I just have my one little lived experience that I can speak from. But it gets so narrowed down to just a few of us who are often invited, who get these platforms, and I try to pass the mic as often as I can. But it's important to note how that impacts our work, right? And so as Tyler the trans person, I feel like I have to be on, or I have to be always ready, because if I'm the only trans person that what happens if I make a mistake in public, or what if I say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing? And so that impacts my work, right? And so then I start to find myself shrinking back down because now I'm scared to mess it up for everybody else. But the importance of us having this panel and us getting to share our lived experiences is that we're all pretty kind of messy in a lot of really beautiful ways. But being messy is part of art, and being queer is part of art. And as I sit up here, I'm like, what do I don't know what I bring to an art panel. But my existence is part of art. Like I had to form myself without a representation of who I was. Like I had to create a picture of what I wanted to be and how I could be, because there wasn't a representation of who I could be or how I could be in Erie. And that informs my work that I do. So when I think about like just the roles that I have now, I just so desperately want to be that which I couldn't see. And I want to fill in that vacuum, and I want to so I can maneuver through the world, typically seen as a gay person, and then they meet my wife and they're like, I don't understand what is happening right now. But it's there, and she's not a mail order bride, as I've often heard. So my wife is this beautiful, brilliant human being, and she's Dr. Prabhu. But when we maneuver through these spaces, right, I then have to like, okay, now I've got your attention, and I want you to listen to this person, right? It's how do I take all of this privilege, even though I have oppression, and then I make sure I get out of the way. And I think that oftentimes when we're in these spaces and we get, it's kind of going to what you say, where the money follows, right? Sometimes we can lose that the attention to the skill. And I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in like making sure we get credit for this work and making sure we're the ones that are seen, that we forget all this other beautiful things that are happening around us. And if we would just get out of the way, the community would thrive even more. So that also impacts my work, is I see who is missing, and I see when I sometimes have to shut up, which I will do in 2 seconds. But like I think that's another important part as mentors is we build people up, but then we also have to make sure we don't hold the mic back from them when it's their turn to launch as well.
So when I think about the work that I'm doing, I personally call myself a creative. I do graphic design work still for people. I do some video work as well. But when it comes to thinking about place, and Erie being a Rust Belt city, it may sometimes feel like we're disconnected from others, that we have been forgotten about. And I think that can be felt amongst this entire panel, that we may, in whatever walk of life we are in, feel disconnected from one another or from what's going on in the world. And I truly think, though, that's what makes us beautiful and unique. And it's the fact that we must rely on community. And we talk about mentorship and creating these spaces for others and others creating those spaces for us. But what that has done, especially in Black and Brown communities and the trans communities and LGBTQ communities, is it has created a safe space for us to be, for us to flourish. And I think that when we take situations like what we've all gone through and we're able to really see that it is because of community that pushes us through, we're able to really say, okay, we can do this. We deserve these things. I've been able to make connections from organizations that are very similar to what I work at, and from down in Maryland, to even having a Berlin-based think tank out of Germany called Das Progressive Zentrum come and visit all the way from Germany last year to sit down and pick my brain and to see what it is that we're doing here in Erie and how Erie is now turning this tide on being forgotten in the Rust Belt. And so my answer to them was what my answer is to everyone tonight, is community is what helps bring us forward, and relying on one another and creating those spaces for young children and young people and others to feel heard, to feel respected, and to really help them flourish. So that's what space and place does for me.
Thanks.
So when I think about space and how that affects, empowers mentorship and creates opportunities. So I'll go back to STEM City. So STEM City, the trio, they basically found this place and either discovered media art or learned that they were already media artists, or in the case of Lone Sav, who they all have so many talents and so many skills that sometimes I'm a little bit awestruck by how many things they master so well, so quickly. And I think there are so many spaces in the Rust Belt that are underutilized or not used at all. And I think that when I got to New York City, having left there to try to find media art and learn it, it was the mid-'80s, and it was pretty intense. I mean, it was still the time when landlords were setting fire to buildings to basically collect the insurance money, and misguidedly, the city itself guaranteed landlords that they thought it would keep the landlords in, right? Like, well, if anything happens to your building, we'll cover whatever the insurance doesn't. And so there was a lot of buildings deliberately burnt down. But there was, despite how crazy that time was to see, so much desolation, it was also actually a time that had a certain freedom, because, artists who were there, who didn't necessarily have a lot of means to, support themselves, let alone the art making process, there was, an abundance of space to create in. And artists found each other in these spaces. And I think that that's something that I think a lot about how, as Erie undergoes a renaissance, which I think it is happening. I think most of us would agree on that. But then we kind of lose these spaces that are flexible and free, and just they become a chain, another franchise store or whatever. And there's a place for all that, but I think the question that I've really been struggling with my whole life as an artist is, well, once the artists come in and find these spaces that no one else wants, and that's where they find the freedom to make art, most of the time I've just seen them then be priced out of those spaces. And so that's happened many places I've gone in my life, including the East Village of New York City. I remember Lincoln Road in Miami Beach when there was only two buildings active. It was three. Colony Theater, Books and Books, and then this one building that had a bunch of artists in it. And now I think Books and Books is still around, but basically, and the Colony Theater, but the artists have all gone. So I guess my question is, is there a way to kind of hold on to these spaces for artists, including artists who are, not part of institutions, as much as I value institutions, like including being here at the Erie Art Museum. I think we need these kind of raw creative spaces. And for now, we still have them in Erie. So maybe we can preserve that kind of creative space.
After I said I wasn't going to become an artist, right? I became an artist. A lot of what I create, it's very minimal, but when I created with heart. So, for instance, the image that's up right now was solely based on the political climate that was happening. And Leslie Sotomayor said, hey, I'm creating the show. Let's talk about our stories, do something. And it was pretty much the political climate that was happening, right? And it might continue on for 4 more years, right? But I'm not get there. So I created this as a personal homage to myself, as forgiveness for myself in the same way. But it's also like what Tyler had mentioned about representation, right? The lack of representation in the artwork for, at least for me, for the Latino community, for not seeing it out there and represented within Erie. And I would always tell my students, like, you have to create artwork. This is self-expression. Let this be your outlet. And I feel like I was being a hypocrite and not creating my own. So when Leslie came up to me and says, like, hey, do you want to do something? I'm like, okay, let me, bite the bullet and let me create something. This piece right here, it's hand-sewn Emigrante, and it's the representation of what I feel that might make you comfortable when you hear that I'm Mexican, that I was born in Mexico, right? That is what I'm supposed to look like. So it was definitely a representation and a lack of representation that I had to put myself out there in Erie, in our communities, so that our students that don't see themselves within in their community or in leadership positions, if I had to really push myself out there, and I told Alex, I don't know how I said yes to this, because this is not something that I normally do. But again, it's just so that my students and other youth see themselves and say, hey, I can kind of relate to what you're saying. Just to give them that insight and just push to, it's okay. It's okay, whatever they're going through. It's okay. Their environments. I think it's just hard when we don't have that represented in leadership positions as well. that they don't see themselves in leadership positions, right? I have said yes to many things. A lot of it, Sister Pat Lupo has, she invites me everywhere. She's like, hey, I'm going to this meeting with Consol. Do you want to go? I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go. But then I see the lack of representation. And then you wonder why we don't have representation, right? So when I have been put in positions of in leadership positions, who am I bringing with, right? I just want to make sure, if you know me, everywhere I go, I bring my kids. My kids are here. And it's important for them to see themselves in me and to realize my story, but that my story is their story. So, yeah.
That's all you got.
Okay, place. Is this on? Yeah. All right. I'll tell you the story of how my photo was in every Home Depot in America. So when I was in high school, I got woken up by my dad, and he said, comb your hair. And I had really long, flowing locks at that time. And I had to comb my hair, and we installed glass block, and he took photos of me because then he made an installation thing. He was a graphic designer that got placed in the glass block section in every Home Depot in America. So I learned what a graphic designer did because I went to the printers with him, and you'll love this. They translated that document into Spanish, so I had to copy and paste that, and I have no idea how I did, into that document. We would, do the print checks, go to clients. When I finally took a graphic design class in college, I didn't understand that as graphic design at all. It just didn't seem like that's what a graphic designer did. You're on the computer, but it just wasn't the same. And I think my point is that that informal space is vital. And so when I think of place, and I think of how a lot of us are learning, and we have all of this educational opportunity at our fingertips, that isn't mentorship. And I think it's worth considering that if we consider, if we think of mentorship as teaching, as just transferring knowledge directly, and the teacher's in charge of that entire process, then I think we continue to create spaces that are not open. And so therefore it becomes really important that if you are practicing in any discipline, that you try to make those systems of your practice as porous as possible so that people can come in and observe what those people do. And I think everyone at this table does that. And that is why it's such a privilege to be at this table. So that's what I think of in space. And I think that's probably across the board, not just kind of in the Rust Belt. Though I think if you're in New York City, you just naturally have more opportunities. And maybe the last thing I'll say, ECAT has a career training program. And I just heard this wonderful story of someone whose son got into plumbing, and someone just asked him, did you ever think your son would be into plumbing? They're like, no, but my brother is a plumber, and he would just hang out with plumbers all day in the summer. And one day he was like, yeah, I want to be a plumber. And had, but it's just one of those informal experiences that because you're around it, you see what that is. And it's so different than reading it from a textbook or watching a YouTube video or something like that. And so it's just, it's the people, not the knowledge or the book. I think that really kind of transfers in mentorship.
That's good.
Good.
Well, thank you again for all of those thoughtful responses. I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So I think are we passing the mic around? Yeah, we're going to pass the mic around. You are welcome to direct a question to a specific panelist if applicable, or you can just ask an open-ended question to the panel writ large. And panelists, whoever wants to take them can. You don't have to all feel like you all have to respond to everything. So hopefully we can get to a few questions from the audience, and let's go from there. So just raise your hand and we will bring the microphone to you.
Hi. We live in a town with a lot of colleges and a lot of college students and a lot of student artists. And I feel in a lot of cases, like it's very siloed. Like you've got art in academia happening over here and art in the real world, working artists, quote unquote, real art over here. And I feel a lot of times like that's kind of doing a disservice on both sides. Like it's depriving students of, for lack of a better word, grown-up opportunity and validation of the real art that they're already doing. And it's depriving the world of working artists of innovation and youthful energy and things like that. So how do you think we maybe better facilitate connections between the world of working artists and the world of art in academia in Erie specifically?
So I'm going to give you my base answer of that. One of the things that ECAT does is they actually have a gallery night. Is that what you guys call it for our kids?
Yeah, student art show.
Yeah, a student art show. And my bonus daughter participated in it last year, and she is an amazingly creative young woman. And through the program there, she was able to do, she did some jewelry. She also did some sculpting, and was able to price her pieces as she wanted to price her pieces. And she was able to sell pieces that night too. And that gave her that fuel that like, oh, I can make money from this. And I think that we have being a former artist myself at an institution, we had those nights where we would have a gallery night, but it wasn't that we were putting our pieces for sale. They were just for show. I would have loved to put my photography work and sell my work. And I think that if we have those types of days and nights and we promote it heavily here, where they can feel like, yeah, I can do this and I can make money at it. I mean, when I told my parents I was going to art school, they gave me the exact same response that they gave you. Just knowing that we can monetize it and that, you know, this is a real business too.
I'll just add one little. So I think we also have like a credentialing problem. Really, now I'm just gonna say it. Ever since colonization, like we've really just decided that there are some people who get to be important and there are some people who don't. And I think academia, and this is across academia in any capacity, right? There is an entitlement and a level of privilege because by the time you're able to get access to that level, you've already weaned out a large majority of the population. And so I think the way that we rectify this is those who are in the positions of power, who have the titles, need to start opening the doors to say these people are also artists. This is not just a space that those who have spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get through here because they had the access to either those loans or, private wealth, that they are considered artists. And so those who have the power, who have the capacity to open the doors, have to open the doors. And they have to start acknowledging that even if you don't have a degree, that that is not at all defining a skill set or experience. And I really, really hate the word expert, but we do have a little bit of an obsession with that. As somebody, and I say that as somebody who got my doctorate, right? And I'll never pay it off. But it's incumbent upon all of us who've maybe gained access to some of these places to then go ahead and we have to kick the doors down. We have to kick the doors down. We can't leave it upon those who are still trying to survive and thrive, and hoping that someday somebody will get it. Now, like we know what the barriers are, so we have to remove them.
So I'm older than all of you on this panel, but I want to tell you, when I was growing up, I went to Jones Elementary School, then East High School, and then Edinburgh. And as soon as I was out of Edinburgh, I said, I got to get the hell out of here, because I knew from 6 years old that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And my mother, from a first-generation Russian woman, my father, first-generation Italian man, thought I was crazy. And I said, well, I'm going to go. And I did. And I took off for Los Angeles, and I was mentored. And I worked in the movie business for 35 years. So those of you up here, just know how important you are. If you would have been here when I was here, if there were people like you, I probably would have left. Benton and I call each other Sav's weird foster parents because I found Sav at the YMCA when I first moved back to Erie, and I was working in the film program up there at the teen center. And here's this tall, skinny black kid, and I was like, this kid has got something. I don't know what it is. And so Benton and I, since we're both redheads, we decide we're his parents. Antonio, I've got to know you, and I think you're just a brilliant human being, and I love everything about you. And Lourdes and I work together at the Neighborhood Art House. The rest of you, I love what you're doing. I think you're really important. And just keep getting these kids in your programs. Don't let them leave here. This Rust Belt that you call it needs people like them here. And I just wish that I didn't have to leave my family for 35 years to find my success. Luckily, I did. And now I'm back here mentoring every film student that comes to me. I will help them for free do it because I know how important it is. So I just want to thank all of you. You're so important to Erie and to this center, and keep doing it. Thank you.
You have more questions? Hey, hey.
So, I think, how should I frame this? So many of y'all are associated with an institution, whether it's ECAT or FEED or what have you, and many of those institutions have physical spaces, which I think create great opportunities for, as Jude was describing, like allowing mentorship to blossom. I'm curious if any of y'all have ideas about how we as a community can foster opportunities for mentorship to blossom for those of us who might be outside of an institution or outside of a physical space where we can, invite people in.
So so yeah, that's okay. See, one of the things that I do, I paint murals, obviously, but I call them community murals because when I pick up a brush and identify a wall, I just invite people randomly who walk past, pick up a brush, throw some paint on the wall, right? Do it publicly, right? Like whatever it might be, right? The chalk walk is one of those events where people come out, they see it, right? One of the missing components is join in. Right? Just invite people into spaces that they would not ordinarily be invited into. In the same way I was invited into spaces where many of you in the crowd have opened doors for me, right? We can do that with art just by being public, just by walking outside of the institutions and people walking past. The story I heard about, in Pittsburgh, the concept of ECAP got started with a black man who just went outside his house and started to just give people art supplies and started painting, right? Like that's the thing. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We don't have to, think of these grandiose systems. Just do it. Walk outside, pick up a brush, take an easel, and just start painting and watch how many people walk around and, what are you doing? How are you doing it? They'll touch here, they'll feel there until they get an invitation. Like, hey, do me a favor. Pick up a brush. Just invite them. Just do it, man.
I think Antonio's exactly right. He made it sound a lot easier than it is. Do that. Show up every day, 100 days, because I think that's kind of when things start to happen, both for you and then whoever else is showing up with you. I think it's a practice, and I think that maybe the thing I've learned in all these spaces, whether it was as a resident, library, ECAT, that's working. People just want other people making stuff, right? We're all so scared, and it's so freaking terrifying. And there's so many different barriers, either self-created or real. Absolutely both. But But I think the gift of kindness and generosity is to show up every day and say, I'm scared. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And you say that out loud, and the person next to you is like, oh, thank God it's not just me. Yeah. And I think that's, but either, man, it sucks if you don't have a space that you can go. And I'm freaking blessed to have a full-time job where I can think about it. But I've had many jobs where just as a freelancer, you just don't. And I think it's really beneficial then for any institution that does have a space, if they could open it up and allow someone to show up every day in some way. So I just appreciate you asking that question. It's really good. And yeah, I think it's exactly right. You just show up, people start paying attention, and that's kind of how things start to change. I wish I had a better answer for you.
I can agree with both. Even with Antonio, when we first met Antonio was through Patrick Fisher, and he's like, hey, he's doing he's gonna be doing a mural. Do you want to come and help? I've always wanted to do art and painting. It's not my forte. I do beautiful stick people. But Antonio just makes you feel at ease and welcomed, and just put the paint, just put the brush, put the paint. You got it. It's like, what am I doing? Are you sure? Like, and it again is, kind of like what he had asked, the institutionalized of like, you have that techniques, right? The technique and the proper technique, and you have your BFA or whatnot. And then, but just with Antonio, just to see the sense of community, when we were out there, I bring my kids. Next thing you know, I'm like, I have this, student artist, and it's like, hey, just show up right here. We'll take care of it. She'll take care of you. Next thing you know, he's in charge of the paints, and he's like, how do I do it? You got it. You know what I mean? But it's all showing up and just the curiosity of people. And I'm the type that if I know that we're an institution with the art house, but if I see a kid wandering at the art house, you bet I'm the one that's running out there. Like, hi, what are you doing? Wait, and they're like, hey, do you know that we offer this or whatnot? And then they're like, no, once I think I had like a coloring book. Like, wait, hold on. I have a coloring book, right? Just to bring that curiosity in place. And, I'm the type of person that if I see somebody, ever since Antonio, if I see somebody even like doing tagging, like underneath the bridges, which probably shouldn't, I stop, I do a U-turn, and then I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Where are you from? Like, what is this that you're doing? You're like, this is cool. Like, and you just start to build that curiosity. But I bring that curiosity with my students. I'm like, hey, if you ever see an artist, they will always, and I mean, all of artists are always welcoming. If they're doing art out there, I might stop and just ask them a question. They're more than likely, which, Antonio was saying how he does murals, and I'm kind of going to poke him at it because he hasn't done one in a while, that it's kind of about time that he needs to do one because it creates a sense of community. And it's, been showing up, and, the kids will keep coming over and over and over. And, next thing you know, hopefully they can create more murals together.
Well, I think part of that too that I try to do is like, you don't necessarily wait until people make their ready. Mm-hmm. So like, you're ready. You have to get it ready.
Yep.
You're ready. We're putting a piece in this show. Being the best one to got. So I think it sometimes takes a little bit of that push when I'm saying we as mentors recognize that somebody is ready to take a leap where they need to see how he goes up.
I would just lastly add to that, if you have someone in your life, be observant, because there's people in our lives that we see their talent. And if you see their talent, try to do something to nurture it. Whether it's like my parents, they bought me a video camera. My nephew, he loves making little figurines out of aluminum foil. So for Christmas, I bought him a ton of aluminum foil. But it's just small things like that is how we can start to really curate this artist and mentorship relationship with folks.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. Totally fine. And then we'll wrap it up.
This gentleman right here, I know you.
Oh, that gentleman? I don't know him. I don't know him.
Thank you. So we're talking about mentorship in the Rust Belt cities, and we see this not just in Erie but across the country. The disinvestment, the extreme poverty. Erie County is one of the poorest counties in the country, and so I wanted to provide you guys an opportunity to maybe speak on the relationship between creative expression and dignity, and maybe what we could do to maybe reach people, especially young people, that are maybe in some of these very extreme situations.
All right, so as a child of extreme situations, I know that as a kid, one of the most dangerous things to do was to acknowledge someone else as a mentor. So I had to learn much of what I learned by observation and distance, right? Because referring to someone as a mentor meant that I was a protege and beholden to that person and often put me in very dangerous and precarious situations. So one of the simplest things I believe that we can do is be the example, right? I promise you, my former self is watching you, right? You may never get the acknowledgement, praise, or appreciation for transforming someone's life, or believe that you doing what you're doing is worthless because nobody shows up. But I'm watching. They're watching, right? And how we handle social interactions, how we problem solve, even through art making, how we smile at each other, shake each other's hands, healthy social interactions through art, laughing. It's okay to laugh. Those things matter to kids like my former self who are just figuring it out themselves, right? And if we aren't willing to be the example, even in the absence of our belief that other people are watching, then we fail drastically in our efforts to influence those people from those dangerous situations. So one of the most effective things is just do what you do in public spaces, man. One of the most difficult things to do is to learn in public and to fail in public. And for people like me, I need to see you fail in public so I know how to bounce back from it, right? That's one of the things that hinders people from immersing themselves in public art spaces or just other opportunities that are available in the area, and that is failing, right? We want to be perceived as already knowing the thing that we need to master, whether that's being masculine, whether, whatever it might be. We want to pretend that we already know. And that's the dangerous thing, right? So we need to see you make mistakes and how you recuperate from them, right? We need to see you drip paint on your new shoes and not go ballistic because they cost $200, right? We need to see you figure out how to remove that paint, right? With Don dish soap, those are the problem-solving things that we minimize and we don't think are really important, but I'm telling you, they are, all right? Seeing adult men who you respect smile meant the world to me. It's okay to smile. Those are the things we need, and to keep confirming in this society in ways that we aren't trained to do, in ways that people don't expect, in ways that don't offer reward, in ways that don't come with grant funding, right? Yeah, so that's...
We have a program at Compton's that it's called Queer Open Mic Night, and we do it. It's the third Thursday, and one of the things that has been so brilliant to watch is we have some young people who come in who it amazes me, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend the Swiftie, that Taylor Swift is on the radio and they are not. Like, I listen and I'm just like, but I mean, I do understand, because we already talked about that in the last answer, the colonization, all this fun stuff. But like, when we think about, when I watch these young people come in, some of them they're just mime, and some of them are really bad, and it's okay. I was listening yesterday. I was doing therapy in the room that was next to it, and I'm like, what is it happening with that guitar right now? Because but there was so much laughter, and there was enjoy, and there was like all of this was happening. I know that there are people who have been forced into sex work in that room. I know that there are people who don't have a house, who are couch surfing. I know that there are people who've been living in their car in that room. And then I know that some of those same people are now serving on boards and have full-time jobs, because of who they met in that queer open mic night. There's healing that happens through art, silliness, and there's a vulnerability that can come out with the expression, especially when and I knew this person got on the instrument and was being ridiculous to give permission for other people to be ridiculous. But they built this small network that has come out of this queer open mic night, that is in a room it's only like twice the size of this stage, and it gets so loud. But they have saved each other's lives, and being able to connect in a very non-threatening way, that we never talked about the fact that we knew they were doing sex work. We never talked about the drug addiction. We didn't talk about that, but we were able to just show up and provide, and that happens through art. And so I think sometimes that how we reach is we have an agenda of creating community that we've talked about, but that it's in a way that is so organic, that happens. Because we're not talking about it at all. And I think sometimes the best gift that we can give people to help them come out of the situations that they didn't create, but that they're stuck in, is to show in a very indirect way. And I think that all of us have found ways to do that. And when I was being a young queer person, who didn't see myself and didn't believe that the world had any place for me to exist, and had 2 attempts to end my own life. If I would have known back then that I would be sitting in a place that I founded and helped create, where queer kids were just going to come together and play instruments, good or bad, but they were just going to be together and do that. Like, how life-changing would that have been for any one of us, and whatever our lived experiences are. But to just be able to get to see that which was missing, and know what happens when we can just be in a space together. And I think this also answers the question that was asked before, is how do you sometimes do when you don't have a space? I didn't. So some of us, we were showing up at the library. We started in these like little spots, and it was through these networking conversations that people were like, oh, I have this space that no one's using. You can use it every other Sat. And so from there, we built out. And I think sometimes just getting 2 or 3 people together, playing music, drawing pictures, doing whatever it is, builds this community. And as you start to share and people start to see it, they start to invest and believe in it, and beautiful things happen. So all of this started to talk. So if you ever want to help the queer community, come to our queer open mics. There's a shameless plug, but beautiful things happen when you get people together.
I have one more thing to add to that. So I've had a lot of tough jobs. I worked at Sarah Reed as a behavior counselor. I worked at the Office of Children and Youth as a caseworker. I most recently I also worked at the Erie County Prison as a corrections counselor, and most recently did a summer youth program for employment. And the one thing that I've found throughout my entire career of working with children is that they want to be respected, and they want you to be honest. And there has been so many times that people have lied to us, thinking that we could not understand as a child, as a youth, when these kids can understand the most complex situations most times. And if we're not respecting who they are, if we're not being honest with them about our own lived situations, our own failures, as you mentioned, we need to show that we are human. And when we begin to respect where they come from, what they've been through, and we're honest with them about, things that have happened in life, and we take accountability for our actions, that's when you can truly start to connect with youth and truly let them see that, I'm not perfect. and I may have gone through something similar or something that's totally different from what you've gone through, but life can be better than what it is that you're experiencing right now. You do deserve better than what you're experiencing right now. And like Tyler said, this isn't their fault. They were born into this. The environment that we as the adults in the room have created for them is the reason in which they are behaving the way they're behaving. And so honesty and respect goes a very long way.
I'd like to share one more story about Bill Etra. So, as I said, he came from a prominent family, prominent New York, Long Island family. But 10 years after meeting Bill, because of his physical debilities, his particularly the stenosis of his vertebrae, he couldn't work, and he was in constant pain. And he was basically making ends meet because he had a partner, and the two of them together, could make ends meet. He woke up one morning and she was dead in bed beside him. And that was within 2 months, he was homeless after that. It just wouldn't work to, several of us put him up, and then because of his physical limitations, he needed a place where you had elevator access, et cetera, right? So it was apparent that it was best to get him into the homeless shelter so that he could then get his Section 8 and then have an apartment found for him with support. I think that, just to echo what's already being said, that art really saves lives, because Bill, first of all, that's why he wanted to stick around till the last moment when he could only make art with basically one finger on a tablet. But and so it gave him the will to live. But also, I would show up to the homeless shelter where he was, and it was extremely difficult conditions. Actually, Lisa Austin, in the audience here, presented a work that's a document I did where I just recorded Bill telling his stories about what that was like to be in the homeless shelter. And it was, someone showing up with a camera that honestly got the system moving, right? Because I'm not saying they wouldn't have eventually given him a place to live, but those wheels turn very, very slowly in these shelters. And so, I don't know that we can go out with a camera to shine a light on everybody's injustices that they're suffering. But I do think that, that capturing these stories and sharing these stories, whether with technology or not, and then having the spaces to share these stories and to gather around them, because honestly, these spaces that we're inhabiting, more and more of our lives are spent in these, virtual spaces, right? The social media. And that's a disaster. This is really bad stuff. And I think that we have to gather in real life. I think that we have to meet in person and share stories. And art is, whatever it is, it's a way that we can gather and share our experiences and compare our lives and get to, build community.
All right. So with that, I'm going to kind of close out. We have about a half an hour left. If you would like to speak to the panelists directly and have any questions for them, or just kind of mingle, and then also you can go upstairs into the Nicholas Gallery and view the show. I have a phone here. I just want to sincerely thank all of my panelists. Some of you I know personally, some of you I don't, until this evening. So thank you all for coming out tonight. A special thanks to our incredible panelists and fantastic moderator for saying yes. And I'm truly grateful mostly for your trust and your energy and your time in contributing to this meaningful dialogue. It's ongoing, as you all know, we can attest to. This is a fantastic way to kick off the new year, I think. So, thank you.
You